Kill the Boer, a struggle song and political chant from South Africa, has been the subject of much controversy and heated debate for many years. In the past, outrage over the song has been concentrated within South Africa. But recently, thanks to the efforts of groups like Afriforum, the song has gained attention abroad, particularly in the USA. Prominent right-wing media figures in the United States and even President Donald Trump himself have expressed concern and outrage over the use of the song in South Africa. In a recent meeting with President Ramaphosa, Trump played videos of political figures in South Africa singing the song and pointed to this as evidence of white people being persecuted in South Africa and claimed that those who sing the song should be arrested. But this perception doesn't quite line up with the legal and cultural reality in South Africa. The individuals who have sung the song in a democratic South Africa remain free, and despite numerous legal battles over the song, a recent decision from the Constitutional Court has reaffirmed the fact that the song is not considered hate speech and that South Africans should be free to sing it as a form of political expression. In this video, I want to discuss the history of the song, its interpretation, and the legal context surrounding it to understand why the courts have ruled as they have that the song should not be considered hate speech and should rather be viewed for what it is, an important part of South African history and culture, and a call for the dismantling of systems of white supremacy. Dubulubunu, which translates to Shoot the Boer, is a struggle song that emerged during the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. The song is said to have emerged in the 1980s, but was brought to greater prominence when it was used by anti-apartheid youth activist Peter Makaba, with the Daily Maverick reporting that it was a frame that Makaba had first uttered at a Chris Hani memorial rally in Cape Town in 1993. During the explosive months when it had seemed possible that South Africa would descend into an all-out race war. On that day, Makaba, then president of the ANC Youth League, galvanized his organization's deep anger at Hani's murder by right-wing whites into something concrete, a song that perfectly and terrifyingly expressed the anger. The song's lyrics carried a message of resistance against the oppressive apartheid regime and became a rallying cry for many Black South Africans who were subjected to decades of racial discrimination and injustice. Going back just a step, the anti-apartheid movement was a response to the deeply entrenched system of racial segregation and discrimination that was enforced by the white minority government in South Africa. Apartheid, which officially began in 1948, was characterized by various discriminatory policies that marginalized the non-white population of South Africa. These policies included forced removals, restricted access to public services and resources, and the denial of basic human rights to non-white South Africans. Against this backdrop of systematic oppression, music became an incredibly powerful tool, not just for cultural expression, but for political mobilization. Kill the Boer emerged as a struggle song in this context. It is a powerful expression of the anger and frustration felt by Black South Africans towards the white minority government that was oppressing them. The song employs an Afrikaans word in its lyrics. The word Boer, originally meaning farmer in Afrikaans, has come to refer a little bit more broadly to white Afrikaners, a distinct ethnic group in South Africa descended mainly from Dutch, German, and French colonialists. During South Africa's apartheid era, Afrikaners were the primary architects and enforcers of the system of racial segregation that oppressed the non-white majority. Of course, white South Africans with British ancestry during that time very much benefited from the apartheid system, but under apartheid, white Afrikaners particularly dominated government, military, police, and land ownership. As a result, the term Boer became deeply politically charged and was often used to refer not just to farmers, but more generally to those upholding or benefiting from apartheid. Additionally, the song's call of Shoot the Boer did carry a double meaning. On one hand, it was a literal call to action against white Afrikaners who were enforcing the system of apartheid. However, on the other, it symbolized a broader call for resistance against the entire system of apartheid. This gave the term Boer a more metaphorical meaning as well, especially in the context of the song, not just referring to farmers or even Afrikaners that were enforcing apartheid more broadly, but using the word Boer itself to symbolize the entire oppressive system non-white South Africans were suffering under.
During the funeral, we sang about Hamba Kahle Mkhonto, and we pointed out in a song that we are determined to kill the Boers. That is the literal sense. But that has never been policy of the ANC. The question of Boer has changed in content on the basis of the realities of the situation and our policy. It has always meant the enemy as a system of white supremacy and has never meant any individual on the basis of this or that color. And even as we chanted these slogans during the armed struggle, they have never driven us to the houses of the whites or to the farmers as individuals to kill them. Now, what has changed?
It is also important to note that Kill the Boer and other songs of its kind reflected the diversity of strategies of the anti-apartheid movement. While some activists advocated for non-violent resistance and civil disobedience, others believed in more confrontational approaches. The song's violent language should be understood within this complex landscape of resistance, where various strategies were utilized to challenge the apartheid regime. In 1994, South Africa had its first democratic elections, culminating in the presidency of Nelson Mandela, and this marked the end of apartheid. But it did not mark the end of the impacts of apartheid. And importantly, the legacy of the struggle songs, including Shoot the Boer, continued to resonate in the collective memory of our nation. The legal discourse over the song Kill the Boer has evolved through a series of court cases over the years, most of these cases involving two key players, Afriforum and Julius Malema. For a brief synopsis of who these two key players are, Julius Malema is currently the president of one of South Africa's minority parties, the EFF, or Economic Freedom Fighters, and previously was the youth leader of our ruling party, the ANC. Afriforum claims to be a civil rights organization that fights for minority rights, but really is very much interested in protecting the interests of white Afrikaners in South Africa. Now, to get into the specific legal context surrounding the song, in 2010, there were several instances that involved Julius Malema singing Kill the Boer at various public events, including his birthday celebrations in Polokwane in March of 2010 and again at the University of Johannesburg. In response to these instances, Afriforum laid a complaint against Malema at the South African Human Rights Commission, which ruled that the song did not constitute hate speech. However, in March of that very same year, the matter was heard by the North Gauteng High Court, where Afriforum and the Transvaal Agricultural Union of South Africa had brought a case against Julius Malema. The High Court released an urgent judgment preventing Julius Malema from singing the song, pending a decision from the Equality Court in Johannesburg, where Afriforum had already laid another complaint in March of 2010. Ultimately, the Equality Court ruled on this in 2011 and set aside the decision from the South African Human Rights Commission, ruling that the song should be considered hate speech, as it violated the Equality Act. In response to the 2010 interdiction by the High Court and the ultimate decision by the Equality Court, Julius Malema continued to sing the song, yet altered the lyrics. No longer singing Kill the Boer, the refrain became Kiss the Boer, as Malema led the chant on the front steps of the High Court.
Kiss the Boer, the farmer.
Shortly after the Equality Court ruling, mediation between the two parties took place, and for many years it seemed as if the matter had reached a natural conclusion. However, the debate was triggered once again in 2019, when the South African Human Rights Commission again ruled on several complaints relating to Julius Malema and other EFF leaders, including for singing the altered version of the song on Human Rights Day in 2018.
Sibram konto halaye. Sibram konto halaye. Shoot to kill, kilawa. Shoot to kill, Yamaza. Kiss the Boer, the farmer. Kiss the Boer, the farmer. Brr, pa, pa. Brr, pa, pa. Attention.
The South African Human Rights Commission determined that none of the utterances in the complaints constituted hate speech. And this decision by the South African Human Rights Commission triggered a new wave of legal proceedings. As a result of the ruling by the SAHRC, Afriforum brought a case against the Commission in the High Court, which led to the SAHRC decision being overturned as the South Johannesburg High Court ruled that they had acted outside of their mandate in making this determination. The court did not, however, rule on whether the utterances referred to in the complaint were or were not hate speech, reaffirming that such a determination lied only with the Equality Court. So that is exactly where the matter was heard once again, with Afriforum laying another complaint at the Equality Court. The complaint laid in 2020 was actually two complaints, laid against the EFF, Julius Malema, and another EFF member, Ndlozi. The first complaint related to Malema's singing of the song or chant that is translated as "Kiss or Kill the Boer," and the second complaint related to Ndlozi's utterances that translate into "Call the Fire Brigade." The highly publicized case was heard in 2022 over several days, and ultimately the court ruled that the songs, when interpreted in their context, do not constitute hate speech. This overturned the previous 2011 decision of the Equality Court. Afriforum, being quite unhappy with this ruling, has appealed it several times, but in 2024, the Supreme Court of Appeal dismissed the appeal, and the Constitutional Court ruled in March of 2025 that it would not hear further appeal brought by Afriforum against the singing of the song. Now that we have an albeit brief overview of the historical and legal context surrounding the song, we can interrogate this question of whether or not it should be considered hate speech. Obviously, the courts have reaffirmed now several times that, despite their previous and earlier rulings, that the song is not hate speech and should not be considered as such. Yet many people, including Afriforum themselves, are upset with these recent rulings, believing that the courts have not made the right decision. So why did the courts rule as they did that this song should not be considered hate speech? Let's have a look at the reasoning, particularly focusing on the reasoning used in the 2022 case for insight and an evaluation of why this song is not a form of hate speech. Firstly, as can be seen from the historical context that we previously discussed, this song did not emerge in a vacuum unprovoked. It was born in a very particular context, and that context cannot be ignored when analyzing the song and its use. Many struggle songs, both in South Africa and globally, contain very strong language reflecting the anger and pain of oppressed people. If we were to retroactively label all such songs as hate speech, it would be like erasing the voices of those who have fought against injustice. To divorce the song from its historical context, as many do when they criticize it, is to ignore half of the picture of the song. The historical context of the song is an important reason as to why in the most recent legal rulings on this song, it was declared not to be hate speech. In 2022, the EFF, as part of their defense, brought an expert witness, Professor Gunner, who, through her testimony, explained that there is a political role in the public life of the state, particularly in African state, because of the long cultural matrix in history of politics, song, and performance of African society.
It shows that a song exists in a wider frame of time and reference. And the song still carries huge weight as a historical statement, and it shows how songs can move through time and cause inspiration through memory to a later generation, because it is a later generation.
That's a very important point. Let me understand what you're saying. You're saying song, amongst other things, preserves a memory. In other words, it's not just a statement per se, it could well be at a given point in time, but it can also serve as a memory and as an inspiration. Is that the evidence?
I think with that song, which, I mean, it would be quite nice if you could also say it in Xhosa as well, for the sake of the media as well. But I think what the song is doing is it feeds into a very long body of songs about Oliver Tambo, you know, that were part of a particular moment of the political life of the country.
While Professor Gunner was able to explain the important socio-political and historical context of the struggle song, Afriforum came to court really unequipped to speak on the history of the song, with the judge stating in his ruling that the approach adopted by Afriforum in its proposition that these songs are hate speech is premised on the literal interpretation of the lyrics of the song. It's important to note in this regard that its witnesses could not speak to the philosophy and the history of the song. Mr. Ritz came to know the song after the 1990s, when it was apparently translated by the media into English. Very much related to this historical context is the political context of the song that leads to a non-literal interpretation. Those who sing the song, including Julius Malema himself, have stated that the chant is not a literal call to violence, but rather a form of political commentary.
You say you were taught this song. Did they teach you what the song means?
Well, we understood through political education what the songs meant. They made us understand that it is important to always not take the songs in their literal meaning. So you've got the song, and then you've got a political education, because like those who came before us said, that a soldier with a gun without a political education is a potential criminal. And therefore, they gave us politics. And it is through those political education that we understood that the songs referred to the system of oppression. So, what?
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Please hold that thought. I think it's important, and I need you to repeat it for me.
Yeah.
You're saying the song was directed and meant towards a system. Is that what you say?
Absolutely. A system of oppression. So anything that symbolized the establishment at the time, my lord, when black police drove into black townships with police vans, we used to run and say, there comes the Boers. But there were no Boers in the vans. It was black police. So anything that symbolizes the system was referred to as Amapun. So, and that's how we always understood these things to be referred to.
This is something that was very much affirmed in the 2022 case, with the judge stating that the most important aspect of Mr. Malema's, the lay witness, testimony is that the song has a significant relationship to both the issues of land and economic empowerment of the previously disadvantaged members of the society. Before democracy, the song was directed at the apartheid regime, and more particularly to the dispossession of the land of the majority of the members of the society by the colonial powers. Since the dawn of democracy, the song is directed, according to him, still at the issue of land justice, and in this respect, more towards highlighting the failures of the current government. He insisted that the lyrics of the impunged song, similar to other freedom songs, should not be interpreted literally, but within the context of the struggle and the political message that is sought to be agitated. He testified that the issue of land justice cuts across racial demographic to include white women who have been excluded from the economy by the system that to benefits mainly white males. He did not deny chanting "Kiss the Boer" / "Kiss the Farmer." He also accepted that the chant was intended to agitate and mobilize the youth to be interested in the struggle for economic freedom. He insisted that the agitation is not to deprive one sector of the society of the land, but rather that the land be owned by the state for the benefit of the citizenry in general. I found no reason to reject his evidence. The testimony from Malema was affirmed by Professor Gunner, who interpreted the songs as not literally agitating an attack, but as a tool to advance the interest of the land justice. In her testimony, she also pointed to a number of other struggle songs that are sung and interpreted metaphorically and not literally, to reiterate her point. And this metaphorical nature of the lyrics of the song is very, very important to consider and keep in mind as we discuss a very, very important component of this analysis, which is the actual impact caused by this song. When it comes to the case against the song, one of the main points that Afriforum and others try to make is that the song can be linked with a specific increase in violence against a specific group of people, particularly farmers. However, in the 2022 court case, they failed to provide any evidence or adequately prove that this is the case. The judge in the case noted that Roots, an expert witness from Afriforum, conceded that only 2% of the farm murders were politically or racially motivated. He further accepted that the 2% does not reflect the racial demographics of the assailant or victim. He accepted that it might well be the percentage included a white person attacking a black person on the farm, and that nothing is said in this regard about the impunged song. During the proceedings, Afriforum was only ever able to point to one singular case where the singing of the song was linked directly with a farm murder. And when asked to provide further evidence or cases that supported this claim, it was said no. The only example I have of the particular song, that where there is very clear evidence in terms of someone testifying, I committed this murder because of this song, I am aware of one such case. Afriforum did also bring witnesses who had been the victims of farm attacks who were asked to testify to their experiences. However, these witnesses were really unable to demonstrate that the song was responsible or influential in their attacks. Regarding such testimony, the judge commented, "It is thus my view that the evidence of Ms. Muller provided no basis upon which it could be said that the singing of the impunged song had anything to do with the attack on her and her family. In other words, her evidence does not show that the singing of the song incited the harm that she ultimately suffered, and or that she as a member of a group that was discriminated conquest the singing of the song." Regarding another such testimony, he said, "He failed to testify during cross-examination as to how he came to the conclusion that the 3 young black boys that attacked him were influenced by the impunged song. His answer to this question was, 'Well, I do not know.' He conceded later during cross-examination that even though the men asked for money, they were influenced by the impunged song. It seems to me that Mr. Prinsloo's conclusion is that because the 3 men are black, they must have been influenced by the EFF singing the impunged song. It is important to note that the attack on Mr. Prinsloo occurred in 2008, about 5 years before the formation of the EFF. As indicated earlier, the EFF was formed in 2013. In this context, the question is, how could the song sung long after his attack have triggered the attack? There is no evidence that at the time the impunged song was sung, it incited harm, promoted and propagated hatred against any specified group. The reason Afriforum and their witnesses were unable to provide any evidence to show that the song has led to an increased number of farm attacks or murders is because such evidence simply does not exist. It has not been shown or been proven in any way that the singing of the song, Kill the Boer or Shoot the Boer, is in any way correlated or connected with an increase or increased likelihood of farm attacks or murders. So through analyzing the historical and political context of the song, the metaphorical nature and interpretation of the lyrics, as well as the lack or absence of any direct harm caused by this song, we can see very clearly now why the courts have ruled that this song should not be considered hate speech. Ultimately, the judge in his ruling said that, as I understand, the impunged song in its political and cultural context, it has transverse time in the history of South African politics and projects the political vision of the EFF in a new dimension of the strategy of achieving radical economic transformation of the society. It is in the current political situation a song directed at articulating the failure of the current government in addressing the issues of economic power, land reform, and distribution. If anything, this calls for a generous delineation of the bounds of the constitutional guarantee of freedom of expression. Thus, in my view, declaring the impunged song to be hate speech would significantly alter or curtail freedom of expression. However, it may well be that under a different inquiry, it may be found that the song is offensive and undermining of the political establishment. It may well be heard as a song that fails to celebrate the achievements made by democracy and the need for unity in the country. In that respect, it would be expressing a view different to those who believe that the image of democracy need not be tainted by what they regard as an offensive song. As matters stand, in my view, the singing of the impunged song and its lyrics should be left to the political contestations and engagement on its message by the political role players. Accordingly, a reasonable listener would conclude that the song does not constitute hate speech, but rather that it deserves to be protected under the rubric of freedom of speech. Now, before I close out this video, I do want to speak briefly about the perceptions regarding this case and the aftermath of the ruling, because I do think there are quite a few interesting points to be discussed here. I personally believe Afriforum made quite a big misstep in 2022 with this case, and it was largely a failure and embarrassment for them. As someone who watched this case as it unfolded live in 2022, it was very clear to me that Afriforum did not have a very strong case. And there were several factors other than just the evidence itself and the testimony itself that contributed to this. Firstly, Roots, the main witness for Afriforum, seemed to use the 2022 trial as an opportunity to promote his book, with the judge even particularly noting that the testimony of Mr. Roots was mainly based on his book, Kill the Boer, Government Complicity in South Africa's Brutal Farm Murders, published after 3 years' research in 2018. His testimony, in brief, focused on various sections of his book, which included the prevalence of farm attacks, the brutal nature of these attacks, with reference to the specific farm attacks and murders. These included the different motives behind the attacks, the political climate that promotes the attacks, the connections between the singing of the songs and the chanting of slogans, which calls for the killing of farmers and attacks on them. Additionally, his credibility as an expert witness was also then called into question. The EFF challenged his status as an expert, stating that he could not be objective as he is actually an employee of Afriforum. And ultimately, this complaint was upheld, with the judge stating, "It is clear even from the version of Afriforum that Mr. Roots is disqualified from being an expert witness in this matter. He is, as indicated earlier, an employee of Afriforum, responsible for some of its strategic projects. He is responsible for coordinating its campaigns on farm attacks, a matter that is fundamental to this case. He is, on his own evidence, an advocate and an activist on issues related to socio-political affairs of the Afrikaner communities, a matter that is central to the issue in dispute in this matter. He is, in this respect, stated during cross-examination that he has a vested interest in the outcome of the case. It is also important to note that he could not answer the question of whether he regarded himself as an expert witness. His response to the question during cross-examination was telling. He stated the following in his answer: "I think the answer is both yes and no, or it is neither." He more importantly indicated during cross-examination that he has a vested interest in the outcome of this matter. These two factors, in my eyes, really called into credibility the entirety of Roots' testimony. The fact that it did appear at some points that he was using this as a tool for marketing for his book, as well as the fact that the judge himself questioned and called into question his credibility as an expert witness and someone that would be able to give objective testimony, I think really had an impact on the way that Roots himself was perceived in this case. Another thing that's really important, I believe, to consider, especially when it comes to the public perception of this case, is the other legal battles that Afriforum were involved in at that time. Because in 2020, when Afriforum was laying these complaints that led to this case against Julius Malema and the EFF, claiming that the singing of Kill the Boer was hate speech and that it should not be protected under free speech, they were also appealing a ruling by the Equality Court, which stated that gratuitous displays of the apartheid flag were hate speech. In this case, Afriforum was arguing that banning the display of the old apartheid flag was an infringement of free speech, with their CEO, Callie Creel, claiming that it is part of history and you cannot ban history. To me, this just screams hypocrisy, especially that statement from their CEO that it is a part of history and you cannot ban history. Because if that is their view towards the old apartheid flag, why is that not their view towards the very important struggle song, Kill the Boer? Anyway, those are just some of the additional factors that I feel may have influenced the perception of this case, especially for those that followed it closely. Afriforum, I do not think, did themselves many favors with the way they presented themselves during the duration of this case, at least for those who already had a somewhat critical view of the organization. However, despite the credibility issues, the lack of evidence, the hypocrisy, and the ultimate ruling against them, there are still many who agree with Afriforum and believe that the song should be considered hate speech. This is not by accident. Afriforum has spent numerous years diligently campaigning against this song, framing it not as the liberation chant rooted in anti-apartheid resistance that it is, but as a present-day incitement to violence. And while the 2022 case was undoubtedly a misstep for them, it has not stopped their momentum or their attempts to have this song viewed as hate speech. Although they have been completely unsuccessful in their legal appeals, they have continued shaping public opinion and perception, particularly outside of South Africa, where the song is far more likely to be consumed without its political and historical context. In international markets, particularly the USA, Afriforum's narrative has found plenty of fertile ground to take root in. There, it is much easier to present the song as hateful when audiences are unfamiliar with the legacy of protest music in South Africa, or how songs like Kill the Boer functioned as a form of resistance and not a literal call to violence. Afriforum and its leadership have also been very intentional about aligning themselves with broader conservative movements in countries like the United States. Places where discussions around land reform and race in South Africa are often filtered through a lens of white persecution and reverse racism. In these spaces, their campaign against the song fits neatly into the existing ecosystem of alarmist rhetoric. And this is what concerns me. When history is selectively erased or repackaged to suit a new audience, it opens the door for a weaponizing of that erasure. What begins as a song, a symbol of survival and defiance, gets reframed as evidence of hate and persecution. And when that version of the story becomes dominant, it risks not only distorting the truth, but also delegitimizing the struggle from which the song was born.
After spending
Sibram Konto Alliance. Shoot to kill, Kilawa. Shoot to kill, Yamaza. Kiss the poor, the farmer.
When our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, met with Trump just a few days ago and was presented with clips of Julius Malema singing this Kill the Boer, Shoot the Boer song, it was waved and explained away as not officials' government policy, not something that the ANC or GNU government agrees with, and the voice of only a small minority party in the country. And I understand why in the context of that particular meeting, it was framed and presented that way. However, I personally don't think that this song and the discussions around it should be hand-waved away so quickly. I think it is really important to note and to understand that this song is protected speech in South Africa. It is not just the fringe views of a minority party. This song is a very important part of South African political and cultural history. And since this song has been brought to a global stage, I think it deserves to have its history and its context fully explained and evaluated and discussed. And I hope I have, at least in some way, contributed to that with this video here.